Respecting the right for truth and justice, the government has allocated required resources for excavations at the Chemmani grave site, which are being carried out under judicial supervision. Further consultations are underway with a view to establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Cabinet of Ministers approved the proposal to prepare a national policy and action plan on reconciliation and coexistence. The government has issued instructions to law enforcement authorities to guarantee an enabling environment and sufficient space for civil society. The government has afforded full independence to the police, and investigations have been resumed into many long-standing cases, including the Easter Sunday attacks and attacks against journalists. A large majority of lands have been released. Adequate compensation is paid to rightful owners where release is not possible. A cabinet-appointed committee is addressing competing claims and land issues faced by people living in areas identified as state reserves and places of archaeological significance. President, High Commissioner, 1 year ago, the people of Sri Lanka voted with one voice to bring about a transformation and usher in a new political culture. Our democratic traditions have been upheld through timely elections held in free, fair and peaceful manner. A number of measures have been introduced to promote the economic and social well-being of the people, to strengthen reconciliation and ensure social justice. Mr. President, the government has provided comments on the High Commissioner's report, and I wish to address some of the matters raised in it. Our anti-corruption drive has been strengthened with new legislation enabling independent investigations and prosecutions leading to landmark convictions. The government is in the process of repealing the PTA and introducing new counter-terrorism legislation. Amendments are being formulated through consultations to the Online Safety Act. The government continues to strengthen the domestic reconciliation mechanisms by guaranteeing their independence and the necessary financial and human resources allocations. Respecting the right for truth and justice, the government has allocated required resources for excavations at the Chemmani grave site, which are being carried out under judicial supervision. Further consultations are underway with a view to establishing a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Cabinet of Ministers approved the proposal to prepare a national policy and action plan on reconciliation and coexistence. The government has issued instructions to law enforcement authorities to guarantee an enabling environment and sufficient space for civil society. People from all parts of the country memorialize their loved ones without any hindrance. In line with the government's vision and commitment for a reconciled Sri Lanka, a Sri Lanka Day is to be celebrated in the first week of December. Views of the general public and the National Human Rights Commission have been called for the establishment of an independent public prosecutor's office. Mr. President, the Attorney General would prefer indictments only if there is a prima facie case against an accused, and as such, the negative portrayal of the AG's office in the report does not stand to reason. The prosecutorial discretion of the Attorney General is not an unfettered power and is subject to the full force of judicial review. The reference to the amended Personal Data Protection Act in the report is erroneous, as the proposed revisions are not related to exemptions as indicated. The government is committed to advancing accountability through credible domestic processes. Recent decisions by the Sri Lankan courts demonstrate the independence of the Sri Lankan judiciary. The government has afforded full independence to the police, and investigations have been resumed into many long-standing cases, including the Easter Sunday attacks and attacks against journalists. A large majority of lands have been released. Adequate compensation is paid to rightful owners where release is not possible. A cabinet-appointed committee is addressing competing claims and land issues faced by people living in areas identified as state reserves and places of archaeological significance. To build confidence among the public, the government is taking several initiatives, including opening of roads, infrastructure, development, livelihood support, and promotion of industries. Legislation is being formulated to increase wages in the plantation sector, while over 5,000 houses are to be handed over shortly. A bill introducing a right-centered approach to persons with disabilities is to be presented to the Parliament soon. Sri Lanka has continued to engage constructively with this Council, OSCHR, as well as with the regular human rights mechanisms. Mr. President, developments within less than a year clearly demonstrate our genuine commitment and determination to protect and promote the rights and well-being of all Sri Lankans through our domestic processes. Therefore, the government is opposed to any external mechanism imposed on us, such as the Sri Lanka Accountability Project, which serves to create divisions and complicate the national reconciliation process underway in Sri Lanka. We are committed to working towards a country that respects and celebrates the diversity of its people in line with our domestic legal framework. The government will continue to work in close cooperation with the international community through capacity building and technical assistance in mutually agreed areas to further strengthen these efforts. We urge this Council to take note of the progress made within a short period. We seek your continued support to provide us the time and space that is required to make use of this historic opportunity to advance the rights and well-being of Sri Lankans through national processes. Thank you.
Excellencies, Sri Lanka today has an historic opportunity to heal from the cycles of violence and impunity that have dominated for decades. The government has a clear mandate from across the nation for transformative reform, accountability, truth and justice. During my recent visit, the country's leadership pledged a fresh direction on long-standing issues. It is crucial for this approach to be translated into a coherent, time-bound plan for concrete action. The report I'm presenting today sets out key areas for focus, including delivering accountability and justice, fundamental legal and institutional reforms, and eliminating the discrimination and the division that have poisoned politics for generations. Mr. President, Excellencies, first and foremost, my report calls for decisive action by the government on justice and accountability, which are essential to fostering a future of healing, reconciliation and sustainable peace. I welcome the government's pledge to take action on major, long-standing issues, including strengthening the rule of law and ending ethnic discrimination and the politics of division. During my visit, I witnessed the continued suffering of victims of human rights violations and abuses. At a mass gravesite at Chemani, I met a family who were searching for and grieving the loss of a loved one. A woman from a southern province told me that after 30 years, she's still looking for her husband. Independent, transparent and credible investigations are critical to restoring trust. My report notes that conflict-related sexual violence remains deeply stigmatized and many survivors feel completely abandoned. Impunity can be a second form of violence that perpetuates cycles of harm. The demands of victims and survivors must be addressed. Their voices must guide the government's policies on accountability, truth, justice and reparation. This calls for a formal acknowledgement of violations and abuses, including during the civil war. Victims and survivors need the state and its security forces to accept responsibility and recognize the lasting impact of violations and crimes committed by them, alongside those committed by non-state armed groups such as the LTTE. There must be a shared sense of the facts and a shared conviction that justice is being served. I welcome the President's statements in this regard and the increased space for memorialization by victims. Second, there is an urgent need for Sri Lanka to undertake deep constitutional, legal and institutional reforms. This is crucial to ensuring that the tragedies of the past can never be repeated. I welcome the government's initiative to establish an independent public prosecution office with independent investigators. It is important for civil society organizations to be included in this process. My report recommends setting up a dedicated judicial mechanism with an independent special counsel to look into violations of international human rights and humanitarian law over previous decades. I urge immediate and sustained action to address deaths in custody and torture, which remain systemic issues. And I strongly encourage legislative reform in relation to counterterrorism and civic space. Despite the government's commitment to repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act, arbitrary arrests and detentions under the law continue. I urge the government to impose an immediate moratorium on the use of this act. My report also calls for the amendment or repeal of other laws or proposed laws that restrict fundamental rights, civil and political rights. These include the Online Safety Act, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights Act, the draft NGO Bill, and the draft Personal Data Protection Act. Despite an increasingly open civic space, my report describes ongoing, persistent patterns of intimidation and harassment by security agencies of human rights defenders, victims groups, and independent journalists. People working on accountability for enforced disappearances and those working on land disputes and environmental issues are particular targets. This underlines the need to change the mindset and practice of security agencies. There's an urgent need for comprehensive security sector reform, including the demilitarization of the North and East, the return of land, and the devolution of power to all levels of governance. Mr. President, third, I welcome the new government's declared commitment to economic and social justice. My report notes that many Sri Lankans are enduring extreme hardship after the worst economic crisis in living memory. Both the poverty rate and food prices have almost doubled in the past 5 years. Malnutrition and childhood stunting have increased by almost a third. Support for the Malayaha Tamil community needs to be a priority. Sri Lanka's debt situation remains concerning. This year's budget allocated almost 60% of revenue to interest payments, which are expected to remain high for the next decade. The imposition of new tariffs by the United States will also have a serious impact on the clothing sector, a cornerstone of Sri Lanka's economy. My report welcomes the government's efforts to strengthen the social safety net and to tackle corruption and economic mismanagement. I hope this wave of change can be the basis for a new social contract and a transition towards a human rights economy in which all financial and budgeting decisions take the protection of human rights into account. I also urge external creditors to provide Sri Lanka with the fiscal space it needs to invest in its people and their economic, social and cultural rights. Mr. President, international engagement through my office, through this Council and the human rights mechanisms can play an important part in the change Sri Lanka so desperately needs. My office stands ready to assist Sri Lanka on this journey. One example of our work, mandated by the Council, is the Sri Lanka Accountability Project, through which we have built a secure repository of over 105,000 items of evidence, a critical resource for legal processes, justice and truth-seeking. I call on all Member States to support this work. I also call on them to cooperate in investigating and prosecuting alleged perpetrators of international crimes committed in Sri Lanka under principles of universal jurisdiction and to explore further sanctions against people credibly accused of gross violations of human rights. I encourage Sri Lanka to seek international assistance with the exhumation of mass graves and other investigations. Together, the international community can support Sri Lankans to escape from the twin threats posed by persistent impunity and deep inequality. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.